Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good evening to those who are not in Brazil or in Asia. Professor Sahashi is in the United States, but André is in Asia. This is the first event of CEBRI's Asia group in 2023. Happy New Year to everyone. Today's topic is the Japanese strategy in the Indo-Pacific. The concept of the Indo-Pacific in new international scenario, in the modern international scenario, the Indo-Pacific as a geopolitical theater appeared in the last years of the first decade of this century, around 2010. It acquired particular relevance under President Trump's presidencies when the US rolled out the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific in 2017, a new reading of the idea of a strategy for the Asia-Pacific in US foreign policy. Japan has had a meaningful participation in the design and structuring of ideas for the free and open Indo-Pacific. Observers regularly make reference to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's statement before the Indian Parliament in 2017. And Japan, we have to remember, was the country that launched the idea of Quad, the informal security mechanism involving Japan, Australia, India, and the United States. Quad was initiated in 2007, then Australia left, and then Australia came back, and it was reactivated in 2017 with the return of Australia to the group. This morning, we are going to discuss the Japanese vision for the Indo-Pacific. But not only that, the vision is not limited to the strategic topics in the region. We are going to discuss how Japan regards the new challenges in the world reality, including US-China rivalry, the war in Ukraine, the prospects for globalization or for the difficulties globalization is facing, and the dangers affecting the rules-based international order that prevailed in the last few decades since the mid-20th century. It's going to be a broad discussion. We are privileged to have with us Professor Ryo Sahashi from the Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia at the University of Tokyo. Dr. Sahashi is the author of several books, including US-China Rivalry, A Shift of American Strategy and Divided Worlds, a book that was edited in 2021. Another book, In Search for Coexistence, the United States and Two Chinas during the World War. He was also the editor of several other books. He serves as a member council on the actual state of land use, on the advisory panel on science and technology diplomacy, and he has also been a researcher at the Institute of Economy, Trade, and Industry, and he is presently a scholar, a visitor scholar at Wilson Center in the United States. And he also had a participation as a visitor in Stanford and as a professor in Kanagawa University. Commenting on Professor Sahashi's presentation, we will have Ambassador André Correa do Lago, a member of CEBRI's International Advisory Board, a renowned Brazilian diplomat, presently ambassador in Delhi and former ambassador in Japan. We could have no one more qualified than him to participate in this morning's webinar. And we thank Ambassador Correa do Lago for opening space in his busy schedule to join us. This webinar is organized in cooperation with the Consulate General of Japan in Rio de Janeiro. We are thankful to Consul General Ken Hashiba and his team for their cooperation. Professor Sahashi, you start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. My name is Ryo Sahashi, and this is my privilege to come back actually to CEBRI's webinar, which I really enjoyed 2 years ago. And I also actually wanted to go back to Rio because I visited last time 3 years ago, just before the pandemic. And when I was a visiting professor at the Brasilia University. So I really want to go back to Brazil now, but by now, for today, I can present my idea by Zoom technology. But this is my great joy to speak with you. So thank you very much for inviting me again. Let me share my slide. Wait a minute. I only have 2 slides, this one and the next one. So, very concise. But let me speak about 30 minutes about my own view on what's happening now in international order, and then what happens in Japan now. Because as you may hear, or not hear, Japan is now changing its diplomacy and especially national security strategy so much, like double up its defense budget. So what happened now in Tokyo, in Japan, is my second, topic. And then finally, I want to conclude my talks by speaking about the future of international order, US politics, and Japanese politics. But let me start from my own take on what's happening now in international order or in the world. In this slide, world views. I think now we are living in the age of distrust. What I mean is, among great powers, trust is nowhere. Like back to 1990s, when we saw the end of the Cold War, we wanted this world will become with the world with trust. That trust is not only among, say, United States, EU, and also Japan, and some other, like Brazil, but also with China and Russia, right? They try to keep hope, high hope, the world will be changed tomorrow. I mean, the world tomorrow is better than today. Because, China and Russia will grow and will cooperate with us. Soviet Union already collapsed, and the new Russia and China, after Tiananmen incident in 1989, will be, transformed into more market-based economy. Like from 1990s or 2000s, many people keep high hope for trustworthy world would emerge in the world. That vision started to be started to be in doubt from around 2008. But last 5 years or so, we start to believe, or we started to be very confident, such very optimistic vision, which we had 30 years ago, not standing anymore. Russia started to be very aggressive, against Ukraine. We could remember, we could be reminded what they did in Crimea. Not last year, but even over Crimea, Russia annexed Crimea by force, and to look at China. Chinese behavior started to change under Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping started his governance from 2013 as the president of China, and in the first year we had some hope he could be a good leader. But we started to realize, he is more authoritative, and he never reluctant to use power for his stronger domestic control and more pressure on international environment. So distrust is really good keyword to explain what's happening now in international order. And that is partial collapse or basic condition of globalization. As I said, when we started globalization back to 1990s or 1980s, we had high hope, the world is better tomorrow. And for that, the very important condition was international cooperation or inclusive order building process among all members in the world, right? But now, of course, we still have some international cooperation. We still have some rule-based order, but that order is not shared by everyone, right? Russia is permanent member of United Nations Security Council, but Russia invaded its neighbor, breaking international rules. China, of course, is not like Russia, but what China challenged us is its own unique vision on international order. So, sometimes, like in the human rights, the behavior Chinese government is now taking is not along the, the rules which we try to, keep and maintain in international society. So the point here is, this is the age of distrust, but also this is the age of lack of international cooperation with all members in the world. We still have G7, we still have G20. Yes, it is true, right? We have many grouping, right? And still we have international conference, which all governments representative participate. But, if we have everybody in the conference, consensus building is super difficult. And international rules and norms are, broken sometimes very easily. And most importantly, no people have illusion. The world tomorrow is better without big efforts, right? I mean, we start to be more pessimistic. I mean, that doesn't mean, we give up everything, right? It is very important. We still keep hopes for the future, the world tomorrow. But we cannot be optimistic like 30 years ago. We have to be very pessimistic. We have to make efforts to change or shape the international order toward better direction with more efforts. So this is the world today, right? Okay, so this is my own take on, on world orders. And now, in front of us, three elements. US-China competition or US-China rivalry is the one thing. Russo-Ukrainian war is the second thing, and the pandemic by coronavirus is the third factor. So, we really need cooperation, but, now it is very difficult. And finally, about regarding the world view, I want to add just another point. That is my concerns on free trade. Free trade was also a very important condition when we had high hope for globalization back to 1980s and 90s. But free trade is now not discarded, but in now, how can I say, suspended or having a big difficulty in promotion. Economic security is a buzzword now in the world, right? But what is economic security? actually, when we look into the detail of economic security policy by Washington, for example, that is not free trade, right? They try to use the exemption from WTO rules so much for the sake of national security. Free trade is now in crisis. Of course, for the security wise, sometimes it is very necessary to spend or to ask company come back to homeland. But subsidy or more pressure or non-tariff barrier are not so good from economic wise, right? So even though I don't deny the importance of economic security or such a efforts by United States, Japan, and EU, and UK, and Brazil, and many countries, but free trade is not like what we thought 30 years ago. The very famous corporate executives recently said free trade is dead. It is not dead, but it is, in crisis. So, and many countries, including United States, they are having a big difficulty in promoting trade liberalization because, voters really want to see, government spend money for voters, domestic productions, domestic supply chain. We really have to change this, but it is very difficult. Populism is very strong in each country. So free trade is another issue we have to take care as a really big problem today. Okay, let me go to Japanese government national security strategy today. Of course, I'm academia. My government strategy and world view and perception should be different from my own, but not so big different. I have some comments on the idea, but let me introduce their idea as it is. So as I said, Japanese government recently published the second national security strategy. You can take a look the new national security strategy by Google. Just type Japan National Security Strategy 2022 December, right? They also published National Defense Strategy. Both papers, documents are really interesting to read because they defined what is the world today and what is Japan's national interest and what policy is necessary to keep national interest. So that could be a good reference for Brazilian audience, I believe, to think your own national security strategy. And if we take a look at our national security strategy and the government behavior, we could find out now they approach to national security as the two pillars things or twofold things. That is here, is traditional security. That is, very classic idea, they have to prevent war from happening. And if war happened, they have to respond it, right? So deterrence and response. And of course, surrounding Japan is rising China, but also North Korea now with nuclear missiles, right? So traditional security is a big component for Japanese way of thinking in national security. And for that sake, the most important tools for Japan is the alliance with the United States. The Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan, recently, came to Washington, where I'm now living, and he said, we have to modernize the alliance with the United States. So traditional security is very important, And now the focus is contingency over Taiwan Strait. And I mean, Washington and Tokyo are in tandem to upgrade their preparation for any Taiwan scenarios. Taiwan Strait is really close to Japan's islands. So they have big concerns on them. But the second pillar is also very important, economic security. What is economic security? It is very difficult to define the word economic security. I had my own testimony in National Diet last year, and everybody asked me, what is economic security, professor? And my answer is, it is better to have no definition. Because, even in the United States or in EU, they still have difficulty in defining economic security. But when we talk about economic security, several components are important, like supply chains should be protected by economic coercion. Some countries start to make economic coercion as a diplomatic statecraft. That means if something happened, the big country use economic power as a stick to change the behavior of that country, right? This is not good, but this happens already. This is happening. So against economic coercion, we really need economic supply chains with more, friends and partners, right? So supply chains are one thing. And the second thing is we also need more robust cybersecurity. And also we have to spend more money to science and technology to be independent to be competitive more with other countries. So economic security is the combination of these factors. But my point is, Japanese strategists or policy makers start to believe economic security is also most important asset or pillars of national security. Military security or traditional security is important, deterrence, response to the crisis. But economic security is also equally important. It is a way of thinking, Tokyo people have today, and Washington people have today. Then Japanese government published a national security strategy, and the big item, maybe very eye-catchy items are first, defense budget. The government decided to increase defense budget to 2% of national GDP. Now Japan only have a 1% GDP for defense budget, but they say they try to have 2%, within some time scope. Now it is politically challenging how to get money for that additional 1% from Japan's fiscal situation. Tax, national bond, or cutting other defense budget. People start to discuss very, very widely and intensively about how to get money for such increase of defense budget. And it is very political. We don't know they can really settle down the discussion or debate this year. But I'm pretty sure they will finally find out a way to increase the defense budget. Also, strike capability is a very new thing in Japanese national security strategy and defense strategy. That is, finally, after the Second World War, Japan will have some, strike capability. But actually, this is strike back capability if Japan is attacked. But, you know, Japan's self-defense force had a big role as a shield against the attack from other countries last 50 years, 60 years. But this is the first time Japan decided to have strike capability. That is, which we say spear capability, right? We focused on shield itself for 60 years, but finally, you know, the government decided to have spear capability, attack capability, you know, only in the occasion Japan is attacked. Other important elements from national security is what you can find out in, you know, our documentation, their documentation. But let me just also introduce a very important speech by our Prime Minister Kishida in Washington, D.C. last week at SAIS, Johns Hopkins University. The speech itself is also, you can find out from Google. So if you have any interest, just put Kishida and SAIS, you know. But his worldview is like this. The future of international community rests on how we respond to this Russian aggression against Ukraine. Most important thing is, if we let this unilateral change of the status quo by force, by Russia, go unchallenged, it will happen everywhere in the world, including Asia. He, of course, implied China, right? So this is a very important citation from his speech in SAIS, Johns Hopkins last week, because this is a good summary of his way of thinking. What is now, you know, he really thinks Russia's aggression is not only the problem in Europe or, you know, the other side of the world. This is a problem for all of us in the world and also in Asia. So this is a worldview. So actually, you know, last year, I was really surprised by the very prompt, quick reaction to Ukrainian, you know, war by Kishida. You know, his position was really unified as with other G7 countries. But that came from this sense of, you know, crisis, sense of reality or sense of facts. That is, you know, we couldn't let Russia unchallenged in Ukraine because that could happen everywhere in the world. So this is Japan's, you know, national security strategy, but this is very short summary. So please take a look if you have any interest. So what Japanese government is now doing as diplomacy is along this strategy. So I already talked about, you know, the alliance with United States, but they also emphasize unilateral cooperation, like with Australia, with India, not only for, you know, traditional security, but also for economic security. You know, please find out any documents from Quad, right? You can find out they not only talk about traditional security, they talk about economic security. They also talk about what international order should be. Japanese government strongly believe this international order should be free and open. Right? National security strategy has free and open international order 9 times in 30 pages, right? They strongly believe, you know, free and open is most important elements in international order. And that is, you know, our hope for the world. And also the government, and I also strongly believe emphasis on global south. Let me share the Kishida citation again. The second bullet point is what he talked about global south. And Brazil is also regarded in the members of global south in his speech, I believe. And he said, there is greater imperative for us to share the principle that international community is not where the strong overwhelm the weak, but rather that it should be driven by rules, not by force. And he emphasized, we, Japan, G7, and Global South should cooperate more over energy, food, climate change, and global health. And we have to cooperate to create a new international order. I really love this word, the next international order. Because, you know, global south is growing, emerging, you know. Brazil now enjoy, you know, your own economic prosperity, right? And so, and many other countries too. So we don't need to maintain the international order as it has been last 50 or 70 years after the war, right? We have to create new international order together. But the most important thing is we have to stick the rules and norms. And the new international order should be free and open, right? And for that sake, we have to cooperate. So actually, you know, global south is now very important keyword in Tokyo, as well as in many capitals in the world. Every day, almost every day, I have a request for interview from Japanese media and some other countries' media. What is the meaning? What is the Japanese approach to global south? So this is very important keyword now, because, you know, as I say, now it is a very important moment for us to work together. But also this year, Japan is a G7 president. We will have G7 summit in Hiroshima in half a year. And also Japan is now United Nations Security Council non-permanent member. Actually, this January, we are chairman of United Nations Security Council. So for that sake, Global South is really important. I mean, Japan is a country now, you know, to change the, you know, way of discussion in the world. And for us, the Global South is the most important element we have to introduce into the dialogue among G7, among United Nations. On diplomatic statecraft, I have some concerns. What kind of vision Japan could have on China? Kishida, Suga, previous prime minister, or Abe, previous prime minister, who was unfortunately assassinated last year. It is very sad for us. But, you know, they try to have vision on China too. But you know, we are humble people. So their message to China are not so clear, was not so clear enough. But now I'm very happy to introduce Kishida's speech in Washington, D.C. This is my final citation from his speech. What he said in Washington is, with China, we really want to hope to contribute to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacífic region, together with China. And Japan firmly maintain an assert our position and strongly call for China's responsible actions, Kishida said. But he also emphasized at the same time, Japan continued dialogue with China. This is very strong message. And I really want to keep my hope. Our high official will soon visit China, Beijing, for the high-level meeting. So, Japanese government is still keep very high hope to build constructive and stable relationship with China. Even though they also promise us, Japanese government will say anything what they have to say, especially on human rights and economic coercion. Okay, so now my time is almost up, but let me conclude my remarks saying some future predictions and final remarks. So, as I said, the international order is now in crisis. This is not what we imagined 30 years ago. You know, even like 5 years ago, we couldn't imagine Russia invaded Ukraine. US and China would have such a very severe economic rivalry with more restrictions on dependence each other. Decoupling is now buzzword, and both countries try to change the investment to each other. This is not what we could imagine 5 years or 10 years ago. Pandemic is also unexpected. So this is a very difficult moment for us. Age of distrust, age of uncertainty, and globalizations is now having a big problems. And what Japan really promoting is to shape this international order toward better direction. For that sake, I'm not from the government, but on this point, I'm really with government perspective. That is, we really have to uphold the important elements of international order. That is rule-based order. But if, we can keep such a rule-based approach, we have to cooperate with everybody, even with China, right? And we also have to, protect free trade. We sometimes have to criticize American approach, which sometimes against free trade principle, right? That is most important things. We have to keep rule-based approach together. And, even though I said global south, but I think, the most important thing is we don't stick to the global south or north. We are same country, Brazil, India, ASEAN, many countries are now, emerging, having a big economy. So we have to cooperate together, We don't need to categorize ourselves as global north or global south, right? We have to cooperate together towards a better direction of international order. The world this year will be very tough, and the next decade should be very tough. Taiwan situation, we have to keep a very high alarm. Russo-Ukrainian war is very difficult to be terminated, right? US domestic politics is very chaos. But, we really have to collaborate. We really have to, keep high hopes for international order. We have to push back against the power which wanted to destroy the international order principles, right? That is my message today. And I really want to have very fruitful discussion with ambassadors and with audience. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sahashi-san. Informative and thought-provoking, your presentation. Andrea, it's your turn. Very nice to see you here with video, but you're coming soon to Brazil, I understand.
Hello, Marcos. Thank you so much for inviting me with this discussion. Professor Sahashi, thank you very much for your presentation. It is always a pleasure to come back and think a little more about Japan. I had the privilege of being ambassador of Brazil to Japan for 5 years. And now I've been in India for more than 4 years. So I have 9 years of Asia on a row. So this theme is a theme that is particularly dear to me. Thank you for your very clear presentation. And I believe that what really interests us here is how these new circumstances, and as you mentioned in quite impressive the statement of Prime Minister Kishida of the next international order, is how we will be able to take this opportunity to have countries like Brazil, Japan, and India closer together. You mentioned specifically, and I would like to start by telling you that of your presentation on Japan, you confirm the importance that Japan attributes to a stable environment. We need a stable international order to make sure that the project on which Japan invested so heavily can continue to be extremely positive for Japan and for its most important partners. I believe that what we can see today is that we are all feeling that there is a change in the circumstances under which our countries chose to progress and to develop. When you mention economic security, when you mention these priorities, we have to remember the extraordinary path of Japan in the post-war and how it invested so heavily on having the economy as the essential driver of characterizing your country in the post-war. And how much you have invested in that, including in China, because you are one of the your country was one of the most generous countries for international cooperation, with a very strong impact in Chinese development. But I would like to stress that starting in the 70s, it is Japanese cooperation that had a very, very strong impact in Brazilian development. And more recently, your very strong attention to the relationship with India. So when you talk about the global South, it is quite interesting because Japan, naturally preserving its own interest, but Japan has been a very solid believer that development is the basis for peace. And you have not only shown that in Asia, but you have shown that in many other developing countries too. So one first thing that I would like to say is that very clearly, Brazil continues to be a country that can be a very strong partner in this next world order that you reminded that Prime Minister Kishida mentioned. I believe that India also. So when we think of the Quad that you mentioned, and that Marcos Caramuru very correctly reminded us that it is a Japanese idea. I would like to say that one thing is the immediate security issue of Asia, which obviously concern Brazil, but concerns much more India. And this has created a very special relationship between you and India. But when you take the economic dimension, I believe that Brazil enters into, strengthens itself as one of the main partners of Japan. So I would like to hear a little from you how if this next new order, which you hint at being something very political, but essentially you stressed your presentation on these two aspects, the end of globalization, or at least the fracture of globalization. So it's this economic, the trade, investment, and the security issue. So how do you see, how do you feel that these two separate but integrated circumstances can be understood by countries where the two circumstances are separate? Because in the case of Japan, very clearly the security issue is central, and the next world order regarding economics is also central. In the case of a country like Brazil, and I think that Marcos Caramuru is particularly prepared also to participate in this discussion, this is my provocation. How do we deal with the fact that our country sees those two things that are very clearly together for Japan, but are less clearly together for us?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I have, before I turn back to you, Professor, let me say that the question that we have from the audience deals with this point that was made by André, the disconnection between security issues and economic issues. Japan has engaged in the Chinese containment as defined or proposed by the United States. But at the same time, it seems that Japan is more dependent on the Chinese economy than the US are. So it's difficult to understand the reality here. And it seems that a number of countries, including Japan, are now working with the idea that we are going to have an international reality that presents this disconnection between security issues and economic issues. But a number of observers and a number of countries legitimately ask, is this possible? Where are we heading to? And so I think this is the question that was asked by the audience that I wanted to pose to you, because it goes very much in line with what André said. Then I have a question myself about the discussions about the new security policies in Japan. Do they take into account the international vision of this discussion? You know, you see, we have Japan. Sorry, my phone here. We have Japan increasing its defense budget from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP. And you mentioned that the Japanese citizens may have difficulties with that because taxes will come next and they are not prepared to pay. And you mentioned to me before we started that it would be more corporate taxes than personal, individual taxes. So it's natural that they have problems with that. But you know, it's legitimate that the whole world asks the question, but if Japan militarizes, if Germany militarizes, are we going to have a safer world, or the world is going to be more unsafe? And my question is, to what extent this international dimension of Japan's militarization is taken into account in your internal discussions in Japan. The floor is back to you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ambassadors, for your questions. First of all, yeah, thank you very much for your comments on international order, and I really happy to hear. I mean, you worked in Tokyo and then in India, so this is very important two countries now in Asia. So I really envied your service. So, but anyway, so your question is really legitimate. I mean, what next international order should look like, right? So I think the next international order, economic security nexus, might be more emphasized. I mean, last 30 years, we try to think separately, economy and security, right? That was the moment we really enjoy such a way of thinking, right? Security is security, like a terrorism, WMD, I mean, weapons of mass destructions, some great power competition, and here economy, over economic affairs, you know, politics, security are sometimes important, but not always. But I think, you know, in the next international order, we have to think more closely. I mean, we have to think more the connection, nexus between security affairs and economic affairs, and how, like, and why. Like, you know, like China or even the United States or some other country sometimes want to use interdependence as weapons, right? That is like they sometimes try to restrict trade with a country who they don't like. This is economic coercion in technical terms. This shouldn't be happen, but you know, this happens always. So, you know, security issue, political issue, you know, naturally connect to our economic activities. So, you know, to think about the economic affairs, we really need to collaborate in security and politics with like-minded countries to create the rules and norms which could bind the countries which might use, you know, interdependence as weapons. So I think, you know, even in business, economic affairs, we have to think about, you know, politics, rule making, national security. So this is, you know, reality of next international order, I believe. So I think, you know, this is a very difficult, you know, world, but we have to accept this new reality. But at the same time, I also want to emphasize the next international order should be inclusive. Inclusive. You know, many people now today have world views with exclusiveness. That is, they say, oh, international order should be like this, and Russia, China is out. No, that is not what we should have. We should envision. We shouldn't envision that way, right? Next world order, next international order should be inclusive for all, even for China, even for Russia after the Russia-Ukrainian war, right? We have to include everybody, but we have to bind them by international rules, norms, and pressure, right? So if we do that, we could have the, you know, even economic interdependence again, right? It is very easy for, you know, national security people to say decoupling with China, economic sanction against Russia, even in energy. But reality, it is difficult, right? We have to coexist. But for that sake, we really need to keep, we really need to have a high level attention to national security, international security, and making a coalition, making a pressure power to change the behavior by authoritative countries. So this is my response to Ambassador. And also I got a question on Japan-US economic security partnership. So let me send one link to your questions. And that is a link to Japan-US documents 2 years ago, which we say core partnership. That is a kind of component of Japan-US collaboration over national economic security, economic security. So how they collaborate? That is a collaboration for advanced technology development. Semiconductor is a really good example. But beyond semiconductor, Japan, US, and with any other country, really have to collaborate more in developing new technologies. But semiconductor is a really good example. Japanese government now try to make a new semiconductor company. We say Rapidus, and Rapidus now having a strong partnership with IBM. So that is a really good example. And finally, what was the question? Ambassador Caramel from you? Sorry.
I think it was regarding the willingness of the Japanese population regarding this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Is the world taken into consideration when you consider the new security strategy in Japan?
Yeah. Thank you very much. For defense budget issue, I don't know. They have to find Kishida really need to find a way, to persuade corporate executives and also voters, to increase the tax. But as I said, to increase defense budget to 2% of national GDP, 3 ways: tax increase, issuing national bond, and third way is cutting other budget. Actually, the government already tried to cut the budget for defense budget increase. But even after cutting off many budget items, they have to increase tax. So now only 2 choices we have. Stick to the idea of tax increase, especially corporate tax, or they have to issue new national bond, even though Japan's fiscal situation already very bad. I think the only sensible choice for Japan is, my own personal take is tax increase. But corporate tax increase is a little bit difficult for me, because that might decrease the competitiveness of Japanese company, and also actually Japanese company have to increase the wage of Japanese workers, because inflation really suffers people in Tokyo now. So it's a big choice for Kishida, which tax he could increase. But I believe, even though Kishida have a strong opposition on his tax hike idea within the ruling party, but the consensus within the ruling party is defense budget increase is necessary. So I think, finally, they will reach at some conclusion. So this year is very interesting to watch, how Japanese government, Kishida, find out the way to increase the defense budget. But I again, I'm pretty sure consensus is there for the defense budget increase. Their debate is only on which part should be sacrificed for the defense budget increase.
Mhm.
Very good. Andrea, do you want to come back?
No, I was wondering because I think you put it very well, Professor. The idea of interdependence was seen as the source of peace. No, I think that this same feeling is very much debated now in Europe regarding how much the relationship of Germany with Russia was based on the faith that the more you would have an economic relationship with between the two countries, the closer these two countries will get. Somehow, many authors also believe that Japan had this conviction regarding China too. And how you say that now that interdependence is used as a threat, and how this new order has to deal with the new kind of interdependence. But it is a very, very tricky theme, because somehow many voters in democracies have felt that they were taken into a path that ended up not bringing what was expected. I wanted to ask you, is this regarding the security and the new consciousness that Japan would need higher security, and as Marcos Karamuru was saying, that there is a reluctance in the population. By the way, the legacy of Prime Minister Abe was somehow very much debated after the very, very sad end that he lived through. What do you believe is, how can you strengthen that security if you had a model in which you had a very strong relation with the United States regarding security? So some authors believe that it's not only the new this interpretation that there is an increased aggressiveness on the part of China, but also a reduction of the trust of Japan regarding the United States since the Trump government, regarding the commitment of the United States with the defense of Japan. Do you feel this has evolved? Do you feel that beginning of the Trump government, where Prime Minister Abe was very clearly concerned about the risks of a reduction of the commitment of the US regarding Japan's defense? Or do you think the two things have similar strength? And do you feel that the new American government has changed a little this perception in Japan?
Professor, this is a key question, but I'll add another question before turning back to you. What's, in your view, the perception of the other East Asian countries, China excluded, of course? What's their perception of the new strategy, the Japanese strategy? Will this damage the relationship between Japan and other East Asian countries, or will this help to improve this relationship? It's your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. So first question about, say, Japanese perception on the United States and US commitment to the world. Even under the Trump administration, we try to keep hope for American commitment to the world. Now with the Biden administration, actually, we are dearly reassured for their internationalism. So even for me, it is totally fine. I mean, American internationalism actually coming back as a very healthy things. Of course, I still keep some worry about American economic nationalism. They have to take care of their own, population, right? So whenever Biden made a speech for China, he also mentioned about, say like employment of American people and, having back American factories from China to United States. So that is my concern, right? Internationalism is there, but also economic nationalism is in the United States too. That is, my worries. But still, overall, United States commitment to internationalism is still trustworthy. So that's fine. Of course, if Trump was re-elected 2 years ago, we couldn't say like this way, And if Trump elected again in 2024, we have to come back to our discussion again, because the next time might be tougher than the first time. Because, as I said, in the first term, from 2017 to 2020, we had some, we successfully maintained the relationship with the United States because they are good people in White House and in other American government, but, maybe in the second Trump administration, I really don't think the good people join the government. So I also have a very doubt. Still, I'm an American specialist. So in the long run, 10 years, 20 years, American people may be more inward looking and internationalism may have some difficulty, right? Even progressive people in Democrats doesn't share the view of international order, liberal international order, and American commitment to underpin the international order. So, but for now, I try to be. I believe American commitment is all right. And the second question is, I think about East Asia. I think our relationship with East Asian countries are still really good. I mean, the good thing of Japan is we maintain the good relationship with almost all Asian countries, like ASEAN, India, right, Taiwan. And with South Korea, actually, the relationship is improved, right? So, I think even though we now refurbish our national security posture, I think, we still maintain a good relationship with all Asian countries, and they really know Japan try to, maintain the vision, inclusive vision, even with China. So.
Well, we are reaching the end of our debate. It's already 12:15 here, but I would like to ask Professor Sahashi to make a final comment. Professor Sahashi, you started your presentation describing an era of distrust, very difficult to deal with, very few hopes about the future. But then you said that we should not lose some minimum optimism about the world reality. So my last question, very briefly to you, where are the sources of this optimism? Where does it come from?
Yeah, I think audience also made that question too. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And we cannot live without any hope, right? We have to keep hope. We have to come up with good ideas. I mean, to be optimistic to some extent. 90% we have to be pessimistic, but 10% we have to be optimistic.
Very good. Let's keep this final message.
I cannot hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's keep this last comment about optimism as a good end to our discussion. André, thank you very much for joining us today. Your comments were really brilliant. Professor, thank you very, very much for you. You are very informative. We have to understand better Japan and Japanese policies, and this was an excellent contribution to our reflections about Asia and about Japan in particular. Thank you very much for the audience for staying with us all the time. And again, thanks to the Consulate of Japan that helped us to organize this webinar. Bye-bye.